high volume versus low volume. What is better for muscle growth? So I think that this might actually be the wrong question, and this question might be missing the mark a little bit. And what I think a potentially better question would be, what is the best volume or the best training stimulus for you to elicit muscle growth? So rather than thinking kind of arbitrarily, should I do this high volume program or should I do this low volume program? It should be more so, what is the stimulus or what is the stress that is enough for me to stimulate muscle growth, but not so much to where I can't recover from it? And if this sounds familiar, it's because this is kind of based off the idea that we all probably have this minimum effective volume that's probably a spectrum of, hey, if we do much less than this amount of stimulus in the gym, we're probably not going to see much progress. But if we do more than this amount of stimulus in the gym, we're probably not going to notice much progress either, because we're going to be over fatigued and kind of under recovered all the time. All right, so I think the better question is, what is the best stimulus range for me? And we'll discuss exactly how to find that in this video. But first, quick story. So when I first got into training, it was in high school and it was crazy high volume stuff, like 3-hour workouts twice daily, crazy. Didn't need it at all. And then when I went to college, I was like, started getting into this evidence-based stuff, and man, at least a while back, the evidence-based and the science community seemed to be much more along the lines of, hey, you don't need to do that much volume. You can progress on these low volume programs, and everyone's doing too much. And while I think that there's some truth to that, I think that it almost went too far. And based on that, I started doing kind of a lower volume program to where I was doing like 6 to 8 sets per week, and mostly in like the 4 to 8 rep range, and focusing on progressive overload. And whilst I think that there's nothing wrong with that, I think that I was already at the stage to where that sort of program was probably a little bit too small of a dose for me, and would have been better for like a beginner. And I got stronger, but I didn't notice much progress in my physique. And then I came across the concepts of MEV, MRV, cycling volume up, finding the best range for you, and I saw much better progress trialing higher volumes. So that doesn't mean that higher volumes are better than lower volumes, though. That means that for me, where I was at in my training, I needed a little bit more of a dose, a little bit more of a stimulus to result in robust hypertrophy for me. All right, so how do you kind of find these MEV and MRV? Well, if you follow my stuff or Revive Stronger, you are probably kind of familiar with the proxies used here. So to find out relatively about how much volume is going to be effective for you, I like to shoot for the session just subjectively feels pretty difficult. Also, you notice that you get a little bit of soreness and fatigue the following day when you kind of flex your muscle or you squeeze your muscle. So you train your chest. I'm not looking for like crazy soreness, but when I kind of flex my chest the following day, feeling a little bit of something's probably not a bad idea. All right. And the third proxy is, how was my pump? Did I get at least a little bit of a muscle pump? And looking at all of these proxies in comparison to each other or in combination with each other allows you to get a really good idea. So if you got a pretty good pump, it felt moderately difficult, and you got a little bit of fatigue, a little soreness the following day, well, that was probably a dose of training that may have elicited adaptation, may have been over that kind of threshold or that within that spectrum that is effective. If you notice none of these signs, if you had no pump, it felt like the easiest workout ever, and you got no soreness, I'm not necessarily saying that's not effective, but I would also want to look at your performance, if that's increasing week to week, and see how things going. And I think that something that would be easy for people to do is, I think that I come across the type of person a lot that likes doing higher volumes and is more on the end of, I like doing higher volumes and I have trouble scaling things back. And I think that sometimes these people, it's almost better using their performance in a gym as a proxy of, is this an effective range or volume range or dose of stress for you, rather than soreness and more subjective ratings. Because I feel like it can be common for these individuals to kind of tell themselves, hey, I'm not sore, I'm fine, I'm feeling good, I can do more, I can do more. And I'm the same way. I did the same exact thing. And it can be tricky relying on those subjective ratings. So for those individuals, and if you know that's similar to yourself, I think that paying attention to your performance. Are you increasing your amount of volume PRs that you're doing and that sort of thing? And I would say soreness and fatigue is probably a little bit more objective, although there's a lot of stuff that goes into pain, and it's a multifactorial thing, which all that basically means is there's a lot of shit that goes into it. Because of that, that might be a little bit more of a difficult one to always use, but I would say that if your performance is increasing and you're noticing a little bit of soreness and fatigue the following day, you can probably say that, okay, this was probably an overloading dose of stress, all right? And then to tell if you are above your MRV, well, if your performance starts decreasing, if you're noticing you're irritable all the time, if you're feeling run down all day, if you're feeling tired all the time, if you're noticing a lot of sleep disturbances, or if you are noticing overlapping soreness, so you chain your chest on Monday, you go back to train it on Thursday, and it's still sore, and it just feels off, or you're not getting as good of pumps because you have a little bit of soreness. In those cases, okay, now you're probably pushing up into that MRV territory. So I think that a relatively decent approach is trying to start around that lower end and working up until you start having some of that overlapping soreness, and then deloading and cycling through that. Now, something that Brian Miner just talked about on the Iron Culture podcast was that when you increase volume from week to week, you might actually just be increasing your work capacity and your ability to recover from a training stress. And you might not necessarily be increasing the amount of productive training stress for you. So I think he kind of falls on and Brian is an incredibly smart dude, and I'm not trying to speak for him here, but I think that he kind of falls on the side of the amount of training stress that's going to be effective for you is probably a little bit more static. It probably doesn't change a ton from month to month, week to week, that sort of thing. And I think that that is a reasonable take. I really do. And it definitely makes me think about my approaches for sure. However, I think that the training stress that's effective for you probably falls in this spectrum between your MEV and MRV. So say it is a 10 set spectrum, and I want to say hi to my cat here. Come here. Come here. I'm so allergic to you. Okay, don't screenshot that and meme me. Look at all that cat hair. Oh my God. I'm gonna have a hard time making it through this video because I'm gonna have itchy eyes. All right. So hopefully you enjoyed saying hi to my cat. She is super old, and all she does is lay in the sun right over there all day long and doesn't do anything. So sounds like a pretty good life. Actually, that doesn't. Like, I would go nuts if I had nothing to do all day. Like, the people that tend to be in fitness are probably also people, I would say, at least lean towards, likes to kind of get shit done and get stuff done. And man, sometimes like I would just feel bad if I didn't have a ton to do and stuff going on. But now that I was derailed, so I think that your training volume or what stimulus is going to be effective for hypertrophy lands on this spectrum. All right. So what that means is that I think that just because if you do the same volume and the same performance and the same everything from week 2 compared to week 1, I think that that dose of stress could very well still be plenty effective at stimulating hypertrophy. All right? It still can land within that range of your MEV and MRV. 100% think that can be the case. However, I think that, to me, it makes sense to scale your volume along with your recovery capacity week to week. And the reason I think this is because in a lot of the research we see that more volume tends to be better to a point. And I would assume that that point is when you can no longer recover from it. So, based on that, I would say that if you are able to recover from it, maybe doing a little bit more from week to week is potentially better than if you stayed static. Now, there's a lot of people that kind of fluctuate within that MEV and MRV and kind of stay in that range and make really great progress, and I think that's great. I think that you can get really good results on that, and I think that Mike Israetel was asked once by, I think he was like on Abel Kasabi's podcast about, hey, say someone just stays around their MEV and fluctuates in that range compared to scaling their volume up, how much muscle difference do you think that might be in 5 years? And I don't know. I kind of forget what Mike said, but I believe it was along the lines of like 10 to 20%, something along that. Maybe like 15 to 25. I'm not sure. But when you think about it like that, let's say you do stay around like your MEV, not even like fluctuating around like in the middle of that range of your MRV and MEV, staying around that MEV. If you did that, you would probably, over the course of 5 years, let's say that you could put on 10 pounds of muscle. Well, staying around your MEV, maybe you only put on 8 pounds of muscle. That would be about 20% less. So if you stayed around your MEV, maybe you put on around 8 pounds of muscle. And, you know, I think that the differences are going to be like so small. And especially as you get more advanced, you might get to a point to where over 5 years, you'd be happy with 5 pounds of muscle. So then you might be talking about the difference of like 1 pound of muscle there. However, I also think that it might come to a point to where if you're more advanced, if you don't really try to scale volume with your ability to recover, then you might just end up staying kind of plateaued. I could see that argument because, you know, a lot of people, I think, just kind of reach a point to where they become more advanced and they don't make a ton of progress. And I don't know, it super anecdotal and definitely a sample size of 1. But my man Steve Hall, no one can say that dude's not an advanced trainee. But his approach seems to be resulting in pretty robust gains as an advanced trainee. Now, does that mean that his approach is better than someone like Alberto Nunez or Brian Miner and that those guys aren't still making progress? No, not at all. And I also think it comes to a point to where when you're more advanced, that window between your RV and MEV is so small to where a more static approach to volume still kind of makes sense as long as you're still within that window. So it's definitely a range. And just because you're not doing more each and every week doesn't mean that you're still not making progress and you're still not in an effective stimulus range. And I just think that is important to ask yourself the question, hey, what is going to be an effective volume range for me? Rather than thinking, is this program good? Or is this program good? Or is this high volume training better? Or is low volume training better? I think those questions miss the mark. And I think a better question is, hey, what's kind of my minimum effective volume that is good for me? And how much is too much to where I can't recover from it? And then from there, using those proxies, you can figure out what's best for you. All right. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it got you thinking. Drop a question below for my Q&A. I'm going to do like a monthly Q&A, I think. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But leave a question below. Q&A is coming next Sunday, and I'll see you next Sunday.